Today you remind us that there are many blessings that have come our way, and for these we are grateful. The scriptures that we have today kind of pick up where things were left off last week. Jeremiah this week is speaking to these same folks that the scriptures last week were addressing. They're the exiles that have been taken captive and brought to Babylon. Now these were the upper class people of Jerusalem. The rich merchants, the landowners, the priests, folks who really had a pretty good life. And now they've been marched across the desert, and they're living as captives in a strange land. Their world has fallen apart. Remember last week in the psalm, we got some sense of how they felt toward their captors. They said they wanted their children to be dashed against the rocks. Not very consoling, in the least. So the message that Jeremiah sends to them from Jerusalem is this: build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. And I'm sure the people who received this message thought, are you crazy, Jeremiah? You want us to just go on living as if nothing has happened? And then Jeremiah says, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Well, that did it. You want us to support the government that's keeping us in slavery? Doesn't God care about us? And the message that God is sending is, everything will be well. Let's see, show of hands. How many of you are worried about the world that your children and your grandchildren will be living in? Yeah. Things are tough, right? Things are bleak. The world today is polarized and dangerous and far more hectic than the world that you and I grew up in. We could say that world has been destroyed. And we'd be right. We can look at what's going on today and we can say to God, don't you care about us? But the message is the same. It will be all right. The people in exile felt that they didn't belong. They missed the comfort and the familiarity of home. They felt alienated, and they were angry. In the gospel today, we have a story about some other people who are alienated and separated. And their lives had fallen apart too. It was not the government that did this to them. It was their own bodies. They were lepers. Now you've heard a lot about lepers in the scriptures over the years. You know that it was a skin disease that people were really afraid of. So much so that they made someone with leprosy stay separate, away from home, away from family. And they had to announce themselves whenever they came near healthy people. Unclean! Unclean! In the gospel today, 10 lepers approach Jesus. They don't yell, unclean. They yell, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And he does. He sends them to the priests, because it's only the priests who have the authority to pronounce that they are healthy and normal and that they can go back to their ordinary lives again. On the way, they saw that they had been healed. Now, for Jesus, healing people, feeding people, forgiving people was always intended to build community. See, the miracles that he does are miracles for the sake of the kingdom of God. And Jesus expected his followers to do healing and feeding and forgiving and rebuilding community. One of those who had been healed comes back to thank Jesus. And he was a Samaritan. Now, Luke wrote a lot about Samaritans and other outcasts. Samaritans were kind of distant cousins to Galileans and Judeans. But Samaritans didn't worship in the temple in Jerusalem. And there was still animosity about a civil war between the Samaritans and the Judeans in the south. That war had taken place 1,000 years before. But they still remembered it. They still handed on the hatred of one another. They needed to go to our forum and learn how to forgive. Too late. Now, the people who were listening to Jesus, the Jews, the scribes, they had no expectation that a Samaritan could do anything right. They looked upon Samaritans as if they were animals. Certainly not deserving of mercy, certainly not healing. God couldn't do anything for Samaritans. But this one Samaritan in the group had just as much hope in his heart as the other 9 Jews, that things would be all right. Now, when Jesus said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests," he took off with the other 9. But along the way, it must have occurred to him he couldn't do what the other 9 could do. He was a Samaritan. The priest would not see him. The priest would not care about him. The priest would not proclaim that he was healed. Because you see, Jesus could cure 10 people from their leprosy. But what Jesus couldn't do is cure this one guy from being a Samaritan. That's what he was. So this fellow disregards the command of Jesus to go see the priest. Instead, he comes back to Jesus and he throws himself on the ground and he puts his face down to the dirt and he gives thanks for what Jesus has done for him. And Jesus says to him, not only are you healed, but because of your faith, you're saved. See, Jesus doesn't care that the guy is a Samaritan. Jesus was about creating the kingdom of God, where those distinctions had no reason to exist. Didn't matter. Everyone, even outcasts, would be lovingly welcomed into the kingdom that Jesus was making. Now, traditionally, you've heard this story many times before. I mean, traditionally, we use this story as a kind of an object lesson in giving thanks to God, like I did at the beginning here, you know? Yeah, that fits. But I think it goes way beyond that. See, I think that today's story is also a lesson about taking a risk because of your faith. A Samaritan coming to a Jewish rabbi for something? That's a risk. It's about praising God. It's about honoring God. It's about having a vision of who God really is and what God really wants for the world. He doesn't want separations. And he doesn't want illness and sickness. He wants us to be whole. And that's not just as individuals, because the kingdom of God, and Paul makes this very clear, is one body. And when one part suffers, we all suffer. That's the vision of Jesus. This guy got it. And so he was restored. And he's living in the kingdom of God. And of course, I think after that, he went back to his community, back to his family, back to his loved ones, back to his work life, just like Jesus was, or Jeremiah was encouraging those exiles. Why? It'll be all right. We still live in a world where there are divisions, where there's fighting. The world is a scary place for us today. The message is still, don't be afraid. Live your life. Risk in faith. Enjoy the good things that God has given to you. It will be all right.